Ethan and Marissa had been on the road since morning, chasing the kind of freedom only long highways promise. The sun had begun its slow descent, spilling molten orange across the desert horizon, painting the landscape in heat and nostalgia. Their laughter filled the car, the speakers humming an old pop song that echoed memories of their early days together. Dust shimmered behind their wheels, the world stretching endlessly ahead, until the GPS glitched. The cheerful blue navigation line blinked, flickered, and redrew itself onto a narrow, unnamed road that cut sharply away from the main highway. Ethan hesitated, but Marissa smiled, teasing that detours make the best memories. The sign they passed read, Route 191, the vanishing mile. The air grew heavier the moment they turned. The asphalt cracked beneath their tires, faded paint lines vanishing into the sand. The desert around them fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The dashboard lights flickered faintly, and the radio hissed with static, a soft, whispering undertone that almost formed words. Marissa leaned closer, her brow furrowing. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Ethan turned the knob, but the whispers only grew louder, threading through the noise like an echo of their own voices. Her laughter earlier replayed, distorted, layered under the static. That's when the unease began to bloom, subtle but undeniable. Hours seemed to pass, but the landscape didn't change. They drove by the same lonely gas station. Once, twice, 3 times. Each time its flickering neon sign sputtering the same word. Open. Marissa insisted it couldn't be the same place, but Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. He'd memorized the peeling red letters on the billboard. The same stray dog limped across the road at the same exact spot. A strange déjà vu weighed on them like fog. The temperature inside the car dropped, their breath visible despite the heater's hum. Somewhere in the distance, a faint hum of machinery, maybe a generator, pulsed rhythmically, steady as a heartbeat. Finally, Ethan pulled over at the gas station, deciding to ask for directions or at least make sense of what was happening. The lights inside buzzed weakly. The attendant, a pale man with gray stubble and a crooked smile, stood behind the counter as if expecting them. "You two look tired," he said slowly, eyes never blinking. Marissa shivered as she noticed that the man's uniform looked decades old, the name tag worn smooth. She asked if they'd been here before, her voice trembling slightly. The man nodded once. "You were just here," he murmured. "About an hour ago. Same pump. Same words." Ethan's throat went dry. He turned toward the car and saw, faintly reflected in the glass, their own silhouettes walking toward the station. But they were still standing inside. Marissa stepped back, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The reflection smiled when they didn't. The static returned, now from the station's old radio behind the counter, whispering the same distorted laughter they'd shared earlier on the road. Ethan and Marissa exchanged a terrified glance. They ran back to the car, gravel crunching underfoot, but the world outside seemed slower, denser, like moving through thick smoke. The headlights struggled against the darkness ahead, revealing nothing beyond a few meters. The road had vanished into shadow, no end in sight. Marissa whispered Ethan's name, but her voice sounded distant, stretched thin. The GPS blinked again, then displayed only one word, recalculating. As they drove, the sound of their own laughter, recorded, distorted, echoed faintly from somewhere behind them. It was no longer playful. It sounded like something remembering how to be human. The desert stretched endlessly, time dissolving into a blur of headlights and whispers. Ethan's eyes began to sting from the exhaustion and confusion, but he kept driving, afraid that stopping would make the road disappear completely. When they finally saw the gas station again, it looked identical. Same broken sign, same pale attendant. Only this time, the man was already waiting outside, holding the pump as if expecting them. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Told you," he said quietly, as the car rolled to a stop. "Some roads don't take you anywhere. They just keep you driving." The engine sputtered. The headlights flickered once, twice, and then darkness swallowed everything except the faint echo of a woman's scream and a man's desperate whisper. "Just keep going." The fog rolled in thick and heavy that night, swallowing the Oregon highway like a living thing. Ray Delgado adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, his calloused hands steady but tired. The hum of the 18-wheeler was the only sound breaking through the dense, suffocating silence. He'd been on the road for 12 hours straight, the glow from his dashboard clock blinking past midnight. The world outside his windshield had turned into a pale gray void, headlights barely cutting 5 feet ahead. Every now and then, the fog shifted, revealing fragments of pine trees and cracked asphalt before hiding them again. Ray was used to long nights and lonely miles. Truckers learned to live with ghosts, the kind that come from memory, regret, and the echo of old CB radios. But this fog felt different. It wasn't natural. It clung too tightly, pressing against the glass like something trying to get in. He turned up the radio to drown out his thoughts, but all he got was static, low and distorted, like a whisper buried in the signal. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple, when his headlights caught a figure standing by the roadside. At first, he thought it was a trick of the fog, a mirage made by tired eyes. But as he slowed down, the shape grew clearer. A young woman, barefoot, dressed in a thin white gown, her hair wet and tangled as if she'd just crawled out of a lake. She stood perfectly still, arms crossed over herself for warmth, her skin ghost pale against the darkness. Every instinct in Ray screamed to keep driving. He'd seen enough strange things at night to know better. But then she turned toward him, eyes wide and glassy, and whispered something he could barely hear through the hum of his engine. "Please, there's been a crash ahead." Her voice was small, broken. Against his better judgment, Ray stopped. He stepped down, boots crunching gravel, cold air biting into his lungs. "You okay, miss?" he asked. She nodded faintly but didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed locked on the road behind him, lost somewhere in the fog. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he muttered, motioning for her to climb in. She hesitated before stepping into the truck, her bare feet leaving no prints on the wet pavement. Inside, she sat rigid, staring straight ahead. Her dress was damp, clinging to her skin, but she didn't shiver. Ray tried small talk, asked if she'd been in an accident, if she needed to call someone. She didn't answer, only muttered, "They're still out there." The fog thickened around them like a curtain, and the road began to twist in unfamiliar ways. The GPS flickered, showing nothing but a blank line. Ray glanced at the girl again. For a second, he could have sworn her face looked older. Tired, hollow, almost transparent in the dim dashboard light. He blinked, and she was just the same frightened young woman again. His chest tightened. "You said there was a crash?" he asked quietly. She nodded once, eyes never leaving the windshield. "You'll see it soon," she whispered. Minutes stretched like hours. The road narrowed, vanishing into a tunnel of fog. Then, through the haze, the faint glow of broken headlights appeared up ahead, the wreck of a car crushed against a guardrail. Steam hissed from the twisted metal. Ray slowed down, heart pounding. "We'll call for help," he said, reaching for the radio mic. But when he turned to tell her, the passenger seat was empty. The seatbelt still swung lightly, moving as if someone had just unbuckled it. A chill crawled up his spine. He stopped the truck, throwing open the door, scanning the roadside. "Miss?" he called out into the fog. No answer, just the faint hum of his idling engine. He stepped closer to the wreck, his boots crunching glass, and froze. Painted across the guardrail, in dark streaks that looked almost like blood, was his own truck's number. Number 1137. He staggered back, breath catching. That number, his rig, was sitting right behind him. His mind raced. He turned toward the truck, headlights dim through the mist. Inside, he thought he saw movement in the driver's seat. Someone sitting where he had just been. The outline was familiar, broad shoulders, same hat, same posture. His reflection, or something pretending to be it. The radio crackled suddenly, loud enough to make him jump. A voice, low, distorted, broke through the static. "Ray Delgado," it said. "You should have kept driving." Ray stumbled back, fumbling for his radio mic. "Who is this?" he barked. But the voice didn't answer, Just a wet, hollow breathing that filled the cab, followed by a faint, trembling whisper. The same girl's voice. They never left the road. Then silence. The fog swallowed everything again. Ray climbed back into the truck, shaking, his pulse hammering in his ears. The cab was freezing cold. His breath came out in white mist. He gripped the steering wheel, staring into the gray nothing ahead. The seat beside him was empty, but the faint imprint of a body lingered on the fabric. As he pressed the gas, the radio flickered one last time, whispering his own name softly, over and over, until it dissolved into static. He didn't stop again that night. But when dawn finally broke, he realized the fog hadn't lifted. It had followed him. And in the pale light of morning, reflected faintly in his side mirror, a figure sat quietly in the passenger seat, smiling. Rain lashed against the windshield like 1,000 tiny knives as the storm rolled over the highway. 3 college friends, Alex, Jordan, and Priya, were on their way to California for what was supposed to be the perfect end-of-summer trip. The laughter that had filled the car hours earlier was gone now, replaced by tension and the rhythmic squeak of worn-out wipers. The GPS had lost its signal an hour ago, and the storm made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. When Jordan spotted the faint glow of a neon sign through the curtain of rain, it felt like salvation. Motel 46, it read, half the letters flickering, the rest drowned in darkness. They pulled into the cracked parking lot, the tires crunching over loose gravel and puddles reflecting sickly green light. The building stood alone, surrounded by open fields and shadow. The windows were dark except for the faint glow at the reception desk. As thunder rolled in the distance, the friends exchanged uneasy looks. "It's either this or sleeping in the car," Priya muttered, hugging her damp jacket tighter. Alex, trying to mask his unease, grabbed his wallet and led them inside. The lobby smelled of mildew and old cigarette smoke. The overhead lights flickered as if protesting their arrival. Behind the counter sat an older man with deep-set eyes and skin like worn leather. He didn't look up when they entered, just rasped, "One room or 3? Alex asked for one, trying to sound casual. The man slid the key across the counter. An old brass tag stamped room 12. "Keep the noise down," he said quietly. "Walls remember." The friends exchanged nervous chuckles, brushing off his strange words. But as they climbed the creaking staircase, the air felt heavier. The hallway was lined with faded wallpaper, stained in patterns that looked almost like handprints. The single bulb above them flickered with each step, shadows stretching unnaturally long across the walls. When they reached room 12, the door creaked open before Alex even touched the handle, as though it had been waiting. Inside, the room was dated but clean enough. A double bed, an old TV, a cracked mirror, and curtains that swayed despite the windows being closed. Jordan dropped onto the bed, scrolling through his phone for a signal. "No service," he sighed. Priya laughed softly, trying to lighten the mood. "Classic horror movie setup. Perfect." Hours passed. The storm outside raged like something alive. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the mirror across the room. Priya, half asleep, opened her eyes just long enough to see a shadow standing behind her reflection. She sat up quickly, no one there. Her heart thudded. She didn't say anything, not wanting to sound paranoid. But soon, Jordan began hearing footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, slow, deliberate. They stopped outside their door, paused for a moment, and then moved away. The friends exchanged glances, maybe another guest, they reasoned. But when Alex looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. At midnight, the power flickered and died. The room was swallowed by darkness except for the soft, rhythmic dripping of water, though the ceiling showed no leak. The TV turned on by itself, static hissing across the screen. For a split second, an image flickered, a door, marked room 13. Then it was gone. Jordan frowned. "There's no room 13 here, right?" he said. Priya shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "Most motels skip it." But the sound of footsteps returned, this time louder, pacing back and forth outside. Alex grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light shook as his hand trembled. When he opened the door, The hallway was empty, except for a faint trail of wet footprints leading down the corridor. They followed them, curiosity battling fear. The footprints stopped abruptly in front of a door that shouldn't exist, wedged between rooms 12 and 14. A small, rusted plate read 13. The door frame looked newer than the others, as if it had been replaced recently. A cold draft seeped through the cracks, carrying the faint scent of earth and decay. Against all reason, Jordan reached for the knob and turned it. The door creaked open into a darkness that felt deeper than shadow. Inside, they could barely make out shapes: a bed, a table, a mirror. It looked identical to their room. Too identical. On the bed lay 3 figures, motionless under the covers. Lightning flashed outside, and for a heartbeat, the truth was clear. The figures were them. Their own faces pale and still, eyes closed, as if asleep. Priya screamed. The door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing through the hallway like thunder. The lights in the entire building flickered violently, the walls seeming to pulse with life. When they turned back toward the door, room 13 was gone. Only blank wallpaper remained. They stumbled back to their room, shaking, hearts racing. Inside, everything was exactly as they had left it except for the mirror. On its fogged surface, words had appeared. "Welcome back." The storm finally began to fade, the wind outside softening into a low hum. But none of them spoke again that night. The next morning, sunlight cut through the thin curtains. They packed in silence, avoiding each other's eyes. As they went to return the key, the front desk was empty. Dust covered the counter. The motel looked older now, more decayed. Vines creeping through broken windows, furniture coated in grime. The neon sign outside no longer flickered. It was dark, rusted, half-collapsed. They left quickly, tires splashing through puddles on the broken road. But as the motel disappeared in the rearview mirror, Priya glanced back one last time and saw 3 figures standing in the upstairs window of room 12, watching them leave. None of them said a word, but the silence between them carried one shared thought. The road had taken something from them that night, something they'd never get back. The desert stretched endlessly beneath a faded blue sky, the kind of place where time forgot to move. Maya Cruz drove alone, her old station wagon humming softly against the heat-baked road. She was a sound recordist, a wanderer of forgotten places, chasing the ghosts of echoes for her small podcast called Voices of Nowhere. Her next episode was about deserts, how silence could have a sound of its own. With her window rolled down, she listened to the wind sweep across the sand, her recorder propped on the passenger seat. The air shimmered with heat, and somewhere in that mirage of nothingness, she began to hear something strange. A faint, melodic hum that didn't belong to the engine, wind, or earth. She frowned, turning the recorder's volume up. The sound was faint but rhythmic, like a choir far away, soft and harmonic, voices blending perfectly into one another. It wasn't radio interference. It wasn't the wind. She slowed down, curiosity overtaking logic. "What are you?" she whispered, almost smiling. She checked her map, but there were no towns, no churches, nothing for miles. The sound grew slightly louder the farther she drove, pulsing like it was guiding her somewhere. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, torn between fascination and unease. The road began to narrow, turning into gravel. Sand dunes rose on both sides, and the sky took on a darker hue, though it was still afternoon. The hum had become music now, soft, almost heavenly. It seemed to come from beneath the earth, vibrating through the metal of her car. Maya stopped near a shallow canyon and stepped out, recorder in hand. The air was hot enough to sting her skin, yet she felt a chill crawl up her arms. She walked toward the canyon's edge, her boots crunching the dry soil. The music, if it was music, grew louder, more human. Voices overlapping in perfect harmony. The sound of many people singing in unison, as though the wind itself was their conductor. She crouched, holding the recorder toward the canyon, her heart racing. "This is Maya Cruz," she whispered into her mic. "Location: somewhere off Highway 54. I'm hearing what sounds like a choir. I don't see anyone, but it's clear as day." She stopped, The wind shifted. The voices changed. The harmony turned discordant. The tone bending into something sharp, wrong, filled with pain. The singing had become screaming. Maya froze, breath catching in her throat. The screams rose like a wave, layered and endless. She stumbled back from the edge, panic flooding her chest. The ground beneath her feet trembled faintly, as if something beneath was moving. She backed toward her car, eyes fixed on the canyon. The shadows below seemed to ripple, forming vague shapes that reached upward. Her instincts screamed to leave, but her recorder was still on, capturing every horrific second. The voices were clearer now. Men, women, even children. Crying, pleading, overlapping with a single word that kept repeating, "Stay." The wind howled, carrying dust and fragments of sound that brushed against her ears like whispers. Maya covered her face, eyes stinging. "No, no, no," she muttered, fumbling for her car keys. She threw herself inside, slamming the door, her pulse thundering in her ears. The car wouldn't start. She turned the key again and again, each click echoing louder than the last. The screaming outside had stopped. Only one voice remained, a low, melodic humming. Maya's breathing slowed. She looked out through the windshield. A figure stood at the canyon's edge. Tall, thin, face obscured by shadow, head tilted as if listening. It began to hum softly, matching the tone that had drawn her there in the first place. Her hand trembled as she lifted the recorder. "Who are you?" she whispered. The figure didn't move. It just kept humming. Then, slowly, it raised one hand and pointed directly at her. Her car engine roared to life suddenly, startling her. She pressed the gas without thinking, tires spitting sand as she drove away from the canyon as fast as she could. The sound faded behind her, replaced by the normal roar of the desert wind. She didn't look back, not once, though her heart begged her to. She drove for hours until the road widened again, merging back with the main highway. Relief washed over her, though her hands still shook. That night, parked outside a diner under flickering fluorescent lights, she replayed the audio on her recorder. At first, it was just the wind. Then the faint hum returned, building until it was loud, layered, and impossible. Her own voice whispered over it, "This is Maya Cruz," followed by a man's voice, deep and soft, overlapping her words, "Stay." The audio ended abruptly, replaced by a brief sound, like a deep breath, close to the microphone. The screen of the recorder glitched, freezing on the timestamp 3 hours, 3 minutes, and 13 seconds, repeating over and over. Maya turned it off and stared into the distance, her reflection trembling in the diner's window. The night was calm again, the desert silent, yet faintly, beneath the buzz of the diner's lights, she could hear it again, a soft, distant humming drifting through the air, calling her name. The first sign that something was wrong came just after dusk, when the black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror. The road had been empty for miles, the kind of winding mountain highway where you could drive for an hour without passing another car. Mark and Lila were taking their 8-year-old son, Ben, on a road trip through the Pacific Northwest, hoping to escape the noise of the city. The trees were tall and endless, rising like silent witnesses on either side of the road. The radio played softly, and for a while the quiet felt peaceful. Then, Lila noticed the headlights behind them. At first, she thought nothing of it, just another late traveler. But the SUV stayed perfectly behind them, not overtaking, not falling back. The headlights were bright, almost too bright, flooding their mirrors in blinding white. Mark squinted and tapped the brakes lightly. The SUV did the same. "Probably just some jerk tailgating," he muttered, though his tone betrayed unease. He switched lanes. The SUV followed. When he slowed, it slowed. When he sped up, it stayed locked on their bumper, unwavering. Ben, half asleep in the back seat, stirred. "Dad, those lights are too bright," he mumbled. Lila turned around to calm him, and froze. Through the glare, she thought she saw faces in the headlights. Not reflections. Faces. Dozens of them, faint and distorted, pressed against the glass as if screaming to get out. She blinked, heart hammering, and they were gone. "Mark," she whispered. "Get off the road." They pulled into a diner perched on the edge of a small town, the only light for miles. The parking lot was empty except for a few trucks. The SUV stopped across the street, engine idling, headlights still on. The door never opened. Mark tried to shake it off, forcing a smile for Ben. Inside, the diner was warm, the smell of coffee and grease filling the air. But the locals stared as they entered, their conversations dying mid-sentence. An old waitress poured them coffee with trembling hands. "Long way from home?" she asked, voice low. Mark nodded, trying to act casual. "You folks see that SUV out there?" he asked, pointing toward the window. The woman didn't look. Her eyes stayed fixed on the coffee pot. "You should finish up and keep moving," she said. "That road's not safe after dark." "What's that supposed to mean?" Lila asked, her voice thin. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she slid their check across the counter, hand shaking slightly. "Sometimes they follow people," she whispered, almost to herself. "Sometimes the road doesn't want to let go." The family left quickly. The SUV was still there, its lights unwavering. As they got into their car, Mark could feel the heat of the beams burning through the rear window. He drove off, faster this time. The headlights followed instantly, matching every turn. The road narrowed again, the trees crowding in. The world seemed to shrink to the tunnel of light ahead of them. "Mark, just pull over," Lila said, voice trembling. But Mark shook his head. "No, if I stop, I don't think it will." His words hung heavy in the car. Ben began to cry softly, covering his ears. The radio, still faintly playing an old rock song, suddenly cut to static. Through it came a low, garbled voice, a man's voice, whispering something that sounded like coordinates. Then the voice changed, now sounding like Lila, saying, "Turn back." Mark slammed the radio off, his knuckles white on the wheel. The SUV drew closer, the light flooding their car completely. "It's right on us," Lila cried. Mark turned sharply, taking an unmarked exit down a dirt road. Dust rose around them, choking the headlights' glare. For a few heart-pounding seconds, they couldn't see the SUV. Then silence. It was gone. They drove until they saw a gas station glowing dimly at the edge of the woods. Relieved, they pulled in. The attendant, a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt, looked up from a magazine as they approached. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. Mark laughed nervously, explaining about the SUV. The man's smile faded. "What kind of car?" he asked. "Black," Mark said. "No plates, just wrong." The attendant's face drained of color. Without a word, he walked to the window and pointed. Parked by the far pump, half hidden in the fog, was the same SUV. Engine running, lights off. Mark felt his stomach drop. He walked closer, each step slow, deliberate. "Stay here," he told Lila. The closer he got, the colder the air became. He could see frost forming on the car's windows despite the summer night. Inside, 3 figures sat motionless. 2 adults, 1 child. Their skin was pale and sunken, their faces twisted in silent screams. He stumbled back, heart pounding, bile rising in his throat. He turned to call for Lila, and then the SUV's headlights flared to life, blinding white, brighter than before. The engine roared. He ran toward their car. "Go, go, go!" he shouted. Lila hit the gas, tires screeching as they sped back onto the road. The headlights followed. Again, unrelenting. "Mark, how can it move?" she cried. They were dead. He didn't answer. He just drove, faster and faster, until the road became a blur. The SUV stayed locked behind them, impossibly close. The lights flickered, and for a second, they weren't headlights anymore, they were eyes. Dozens of them, staring, watching, unblinking. And then, just as suddenly, the SUV vanished. The road was empty again. Silence filled the car except for Ben's soft sobs. Mark pulled over, hands trembling. He turned to Lila and froze. The reflection in her window wasn't hers. The woman staring back had hollow black eyes and a smile that didn't belong to her. The car lights flickered. The radio came alive again, whispering a voice that sounded like all three of them speaking at once. "Keep driving." Somewhere behind them, in the distance, the hum of an engine began to rise again. Steady, patient, waiting. The desert highway stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of cracked asphalt glowing faintly under the moonlight. Danny and his best friend, Omar, had been on the road for almost 12 hours, chasing what they thought would be the ultimate adventure. A cross-country trip from Los Angeles to New Orleans. The stereo hummed with old rock tunes, and empty soda cans littered the dashboard. The mood was light, the kind of carefree exhaustion that comes after hours of laughter, bad fast food, and too many gas station coffees. But the deeper they drove into the night, the more the desert began to feel wrong. Too still, too quiet, as if the world had paused just for them. They hadn't passed another car for nearly an hour when the radio crackled with static. Omar smacked the dial. "We lost signal again?" he said, his voice breaking the silence. Danny shrugged. "We're in the middle of nowhere. What do you expect?" Then, faintly, through the static, a voice emerged. It was distant at first, just a whisper, but it grew clearer with each passing mile, until words began to form. "You shouldn't have taken this road," the voice said, calm and male. Omar frowned. "You hear that?" Danny laughed uneasily. Probably just some weird frequency interference. He turned the volume down. The voice persisted. "Turn around." Omar reached over and switched the radio off completely. Silence returned. The desert wind howled against the car windows. Then, without warning, a figure appeared on the side of the road. A woman, standing motionless, wearing a long white dress that shimmered faintly under the headlights. Danny swerved hard, tires screeching. The car spun, dust flying. When they came to a stop, the woman was gone. The desert stretched on, untouched. Danny's heart pounded. "Did you see that?" he gasped. Omar nodded slowly, his hands shaking. "She was right there, man. Right in the middle of the road." They stepped out of the car, the night air biting and dry. The desert smelled like dust and decay. The engine ticked softly, cooling. In the distance, the horizon glowed faintly orange. Though there was no town, no light source, nothing. "Let's just keep moving," Danny muttered. They climbed back in and continued driving, the silence heavy. But then, the same woman appeared again, standing in the middle of the road, closer this time. Her face was hidden by her long black hair, her hands pale and limp at her sides. Danny slammed the brakes. This time, she didn't vanish. She lifted her head slowly, revealing eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the headlights. She smiled, and then the car engine died. Omar turned the key again and again. Nothing. The radio flickered back to life, static morphing into a low, humming chant. Unintelligible but rhythmic, like something ancient. Danny's pulse raced. "We're not supposed to be here," he whispered. The woman began walking toward them, her movements slow and jerky, like her body didn't quite belong to her. The sound of her bare feet scraping the asphalt filled the silence. Danny grabbed the flashlight and pointed it at her. For a moment, the beam illuminated her face. Hollow cheeks, cracked lips, and a throat cut clean across, dark and glistening. Omar screamed, fumbling for the keys again. The car suddenly roared to life on its own. Danny floored the gas pedal, and they sped forward, the woman's body hitting the hood with a sickening thud before tumbling into the darkness behind them. "Oh God! Oh God!" Omar cried. Danny didn't stop. He couldn't. His hands were slick with sweat, his chest tight. "She wasn't real," he whispered, as if saying it would make it true. But miles down the road, when he glanced in the rearview mirror, she was there again. Sitting in the back seat, soaked in blood, her head tilted, her eyes locked on his. Danny froze, too afraid to turn. "Don't look back," Omar said in a broken voice. "If you look, she'll—" But it was too late. Danny's gaze met hers. The air grew cold. The desert outside disappeared, replaced by flashes, quick, violent images of a burning car, twisted metal, two men screaming. The smell of gasoline filled the air. He blinked, and it was gone. They drove in silence for what felt like hours until a sign appeared up ahead. Welcome to Coldwater Rest Stop, Population 12. Relieved, they pulled in, hoping for a phone or another human being. But the gas station was deserted. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. A payphone hung off its hook, swinging slightly in the wind. Danny approached it, pressing the receiver to his ear. There was static, then a voice, his own. "You shouldn't have taken this road." Omar backed toward the car. "Danny, we need to go." The air was growing colder. The station lights buzzed louder, flickering faster. Suddenly, all went dark. Then, from the shadows behind the pumps, the woman stepped forward again. But this time, there were more of them. Dozens. All wearing the same tattered white dresses. All with throats slit and eyes like deep black wells. They began moving closer, surrounding the car. Danny and Omar dove in, locking the doors. The headlights flickered on by themselves. The women circled slowly, their faces illuminated in flashes. Some old, some young, all dead. The radio burst alive again with distorted screams and whispers blending together, chanting that same phrase over and over. "You shouldn't have taken this road." Danny floored the accelerator, crashing through the circle, the car lurching violently as bodies thudded against the sides. When they looked back, the figures had vanished, leaving only the desert and silence behind. They didn't stop driving until the sun rose, painting the desert gold. Relief washed over them until they saw the road sign again. Welcome to Coldwater Rest Stop, Population 12. They had looped back somehow. The same cracked pavement, the same flickering lights, the same swinging payphone. Only now, the pump reflected something behind them. Two pale figures, standing side by side, watching. Omar whispered, "Danny, what if we never left?" But Danny didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the mirror. In the reflection, the woman sat in the back seat again, smiling faintly, as the radio clicked on one final time and whispered in that same, calm voice, "Keep driving." The rain came down in thick, relentless sheets, drumming against the windshield like 1,000 tiny fists. Claire gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale. She hated driving in the rain, but she and her fiancé, Ryan, had no choice. They were hours away from their cabin in the Smoky Mountains, and the storm had rolled in faster than expected. The GPS flickered weakly, its signal cutting in and out as the car climbed higher into the misty hills. The headlights barely reached 10 feet ahead, swallowed by fog so dense it looked like smoke. "Let's just find a motel," Ryan said, his voice tight with unease. "We'll start again in the morning." But Claire shook her head. "We're almost there. It's supposed to be a 2-lane road, then a bridge, then the turnoff." She spoke as if repeating the directions would make the road appear. The wipers squealed across the glass, failing to keep up. The forest on either side loomed like dark, breathing walls. Every now and then, lightning flashed, and for an instant, Claire thought she saw something moving between the trees. A figure. Then it was gone. The rain thickened into a downpour. The bridge finally appeared ahead, an old iron structure spanning a black river swollen from the storm. Ryan leaned forward. "That doesn't look safe." Claire forced a laugh. "It's fine. It's probably been there for decades." She pressed the gas and started across. The bridge groaned under the weight of the car, each plank creaking like old bones. Halfway across, the headlights flickered, then died completely. The engine sputtered and stalled. Darkness swallowed them. Ryan cursed and turned the key. Nothing. The only sound was the rain and the deep, slow creak of the bridge beneath them. Then came a knock, soft, deliberate, from Claire's side window. Her heart leapt into her throat. She turned her head, but the glass was opaque with rain. Another knock, harder this time. "Ryan," she whispered. "There's someone outside." He squinted through the windshield, but the fog was too thick. He could barely make out the shape of a tall figure standing just beyond the beams of the dead headlights. It was still, motionless, almost blending into the mist. Probably just someone stranded, Ryan said, though his voice trembled. Claire shook her head. No one's out here. The figure began walking toward the car, slow, heavy footsteps echoing across the bridge. Claire reached for her phone. No signal. Ryan, start the car, she hissed. He tried again. The engine coughed once, then went silent. The figure stopped beside the driver's window. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a pale hand pressed against the glass. The skin looked gray and bloated, like it had been underwater for days. Claire's breath caught in her throat. The hand slid slowly down the window, leaving behind streaks that looked darker than rain. Lightning flashed again, and the figure's face came into view. Hollow eyes, skin peeling, a mouth open wide in a soundless scream. Claire screamed and ducked. Ryan slammed his hand on the ignition one last time. The engine roared to life. The headlights flared on, and the figure was gone. They sped across the rest of the bridge, splashing through the puddles until the road returned to solid ground. What the hell was that? Ryan gasped. Claire didn't answer. She just stared straight ahead, trembling. The trees on either side seemed to close in, their branches scraping the roof like skeletal fingers. After a few minutes, she finally spoke. Ryan, do you hear that? First, he didn't. Then it came, a rhythmic creaking sound, like ropes swaying in the wind. It grew louder, closer, until it seemed to echo inside the car itself. It's coming from above us, Claire whispered. Ryan leaned out the window, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the rain and froze on a figure hanging from a noose, swaying from the trees above the road. Its neck was twisted, its face blue. Claire screamed. Ryan swerved, tires skidding on the wet pavement. The car slammed to a stop. When they looked up again, the hanging body was gone. Just the rain, just the trees. We're leaving, Ryan said firmly. We're turning around. He shifted into reverse, but the car wouldn't move. It was like something was holding it in place. The tires spun uselessly. Then, from the back seat, came a wet, choking sound. Claire turned slowly. Water was dripping from the roof liner onto the seat. No, not water. Blood. A puddle of it was forming, dark and thick. Ryan froze. Get out, he said hoarsely. They flung open the doors and stumbled into the storm. The car headlights began to flicker again, strobing like a warning signal. And in that light, they saw them, dozens of figures standing in the rain along the roadside. Hanging figures, all swaying in unison. Each one had a rope burn around the neck. Each one faced the couple, and each one began to move forward, their feet dragging along the wet pavement. Ryan grabbed Claire's hand. Run, he shouted. They sprinted toward the woods, branches whipping their faces. The forest floor was slick and uneven, the air thick with mist. Behind them, the sound of dragging feet grew louder, closer. Then came whispers, overlapping voices that filled the air like static. You crossed the bridge. You shouldn't have crossed. They stumbled upon an old ranger cabin, half collapsed and buried under vines. Ryan kicked the door open, pushing Claire inside. It smelled of mold and rot. The air was icy cold. Lightning flashed through the broken window, illuminating the peeling wallpaper and water-damaged furniture. There were photographs nailed to the wall, dozens of them. Each one showed people standing on the same bridge they'd just crossed. Couples, families, travelers. And in the background of every photo was the same tall, faceless figure standing in the mist. Claire backed away, her hand over her mouth. It's been watching this place forever, she whispered. Ryan searched frantically for a phone or a weapon, anything. He found an old rotary phone on a table and lifted the receiver. To his shock, it worked. But when he brought it to his ear, all he heard was heavy breathing. Then a voice, deep and slow. You shouldn't have crossed. The line went dead. The cabin door burst open as the wind howled through. The hanging figures were there again, filling the doorway, their faces pale and dripping. They moved like marionettes, jerking forward with every flash of lightning. Ryan grabbed an old lantern and swung it wildly, but the figures didn't flinch. Claire screamed as one reached for her, cold fingers brushing her cheek. She turned to run, But Ryan wasn't behind her anymore. When she looked back, he was standing still, eyes wide, lips trembling. A rope had appeared around his neck. He tried to speak, but only a gurgled sound came out before his body was yanked upward into the darkness above. Claire collapsed to her knees, sobbing. "Please, just let me go," she cried into the storm. The whispers grew louder, circling her. Then silence. She was alone again. The rain eased. The headlights of their car flickered faintly through the trees. She stumbled toward them, her breath ragged. When she reached the bridge, the fog had lifted. The road ahead was clear, calm. She climbed into the car, shivering, and turned the key. The engine started smoothly, as if nothing had happened. She exhaled in relief, pulling onto the bridge one last time. But as she crossed, she caught sight of her reflection in the rearview mirror, and froze. A dark bruise had formed around her neck, faint but unmistakable, like a rope mark. Lightning flashed one final time, revealing a shape hanging in the mirror's background. Her own body, swaying slowly in the storm. The car continued forward, driverless, disappearing into the fog. The highway was silent except for the hum of tires on wet asphalt and the faint thump of wiper blades. Jacob had been driving for nearly 10 hours straight, eyes heavy, body aching. The digital clock on the dashboard blinked 2:47 a.m. The stretch of road ahead was endless, a lonely two-lane route cutting through the heart of rural Kansas. He hadn't seen another car in over an hour, and his phone battery was almost dead. The world outside was swallowed by darkness, save for the thin beam of his headlights and the rolling fog that drifted low across the fields. He was on his way home from his father's funeral. The drive was supposed to clear his mind, but instead, it felt like the world was pressing in on him, tighter with every mile. His father had been a long-haul trucker, the kind of man who lived and died on the road, and Jacob had always sworn he'd never follow in his footsteps. Yet here he was, alone on an empty highway, chasing ghosts through the dark. The first sign of something wrong came when he noticed the mile markers. He'd been watching them count down for hours, but now they weren't changing. Each one read the same number, 237. At first, he thought it was fatigue, maybe a trick of the light. But after the fifth identical sign, a cold realization crept in. He wasn't moving forward. Somehow, the road was looping. He shook his head, laughing nervously to himself. "Get it together, man," he muttered. He rolled down the window, letting the night air sting his face. It smelled faintly of rain, and something else. Something metallic like rust or blood. He cranked up the radio to drown out the growing unease. Static. Then, faintly, his father's voice came through the speakers. "Jake, you shouldn't be on this road." Jacob froze. His hand hovered over the dial. The voice was unmistakable, deep, steady, just like he remembered. "Dad?" he whispered. The voice came again, clearer this time. "You missed your turn. You're not supposed to be here." The radio clicked off by itself. Jacob stared at it, heart pounding. He looked out the window and saw headlights approaching from behind. Relief flooded him. "Finally," he muttered. "Another driver." But as the lights grew closer, he realized they weren't headlights at all. They were red. Two perfect circles, glowing steadily, like eyes. They rose higher, hovering just above the ground, gaining speed. The rearview mirror shook. The glow filled the car's interior with a dull crimson light. Then they were gone. He slowed, peering into the darkness. The road was empty again. No car, no lights, nothing. The only sound was the wind moaning through the cornfields. He exhaled shakily, gripping the wheel tighter. "You're tired," he told himself. "You're just tired." He drove on for another 10 minutes or maybe an hour. Time felt distorted. The fog grew thicker, swirling in strange patterns like smoke. He caught glimpses of movement in the corner of his eye, shadows darting between the stalks of corn, keeping pace with his car. Every so often, he thought he saw faces in the glass, pale, flickering reflections that didn't belong to him. He blinked hard, forcing himself to focus. The mile markers still read 237. Finally, A shape appeared ahead, a gas station. Relief washed over him. He pulled in quickly, the tires crunching gravel. The place looked old, abandoned, its neon sign flickering weakly. The pump handles swung loosely in the wind, squeaking. But the lights inside were on. A single figure stood behind the counter, motionless. Jacob stepped out cautiously. The night was eerily quiet, except for the buzzing of the flickering light. The moment he opened the glass door, a small bell chimed above him, a brittle, hollow sound. The clerk didn't look up. His face was hidden under a trucker's cap, his head bowed. Hey, Jacob said, forcing a laugh. Pumps still work. The man's voice was slow and gravelly. You shouldn't have come this way. Jacob froze. What? The man lifted his head. His eyes were black, bottomless pits. His skin was pale, stretched tight over bone. You're driving the wrong road, he said. No one ever leaves it. Jacob backed toward the door. Okay, I'm just gonna... He turned to leave, but the door was gone. Where glass had been, there was now a wall. The room had changed. The lights were dimmer. The air was thick with rot. The clerk was no longer behind the counter. From the far corner of the store came a faint sound, the slow creak of footsteps. Jacob turned his flashlight toward it. The beam landed on a man slumped against the wall, wearing a trucker's jacket soaked in blood. His face was gray, lifeless, but familiar. It was his father. Jacob dropped the flashlight, stumbling back. No, that's not possible. The corpse's head lifted slowly, its mouth opening with a wet crack. You took my road, the voice rasped. The same voice from the radio. You shouldn't have taken it. The lights exploded. The store was plunged into darkness. Jacob bolted through the side door, gasping for air. The fog outside was thicker now, swirling violently. He ran to his car, but it wasn't there. In its place was his father's old truck, rusted and covered in grime. The keys dangled from the ignition. Against every instinct, Jacob climbed inside. The seat was wet, cold. He turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, but the radio came on again, blaring static. Through it came whispers, dozens of voices, overlapping, chanting his name. He floored the gas pedal and sped down the road. The fog pulsed with red light now, those glowing orbs reappearing behind him. They grew larger, closer. He realized with a jolt that they weren't lights. They were the eyes of something vast, crawling across the fields. Its shadow moved alongside the car, limbs long and spindly, scraping the asphalt. It was following him. Jacob screamed and pressed harder on the accelerator. The road twisted and turned, though he didn't remember any turns before. The mile marker appeared again. 237. He was back where he started. The engine began to fail, sputtering and coughing. The radio crackled, his father's voice once more. Son, the road doesn't end. The headlights flickered, revealing the outline of a massive figure standing directly ahead. Jacob slammed the brakes, tires screeching. The figure was tall, inhuman, its face obscured by shadow. As the fog rolled over it, it leaned down impossibly low until it filled the windshield. Its eyes burned red, and in a voice that shook the car itself, it whispered, Now you drive forever. Jacob screamed, throwing the car into reverse, but it didn't move. The road beneath him began to crack, glowing faintly with light. The steering wheel twisted on its own, locking into place. The last thing Jacob heard was the radio. Not static this time, but the sound of his father's voice saying softly, Welcome home. The next morning, a trucker passing through found a rusted pickup parked on the shoulder of Route 237. Inside was a man slumped over the wheel, eyes open, hands gripping the steering wheel. The car radio played faint static. The odometer read infinity. The road twisted through the Appalachian foothills like a serpent, vanishing into mist and shadow. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the air still felt heavy, saturated with something unseen. Emma drove in silence, her fingers tapping the steering wheel to an imaginary rhythm, the hum of the tires the only sound in the car. She was on her way to visit her sister, taking the scenic route as she always did. But somewhere along the way, the GPS had rerouted her onto a road she didn't recognize, Hollow Creek Road. It read. She'd never heard of it before. The forest around her was dense, ancient, the kind that seemed to swallow sound. Even her headlights looked dim against the darkness, illuminating only the narrow stretch ahead. The deeper she went, the less the world made sense. No signs, no houses, no cars. Just trees and the faint glint of water running parallel to the road. She checked her phone. No signal. When she looked up again, she nearly screamed. A woman was standing in the middle of the road. Emma slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching. The car stopped inches away. Her heart pounded as she stared through the windshield. The woman didn't move. She wore a tattered gray dress, soaked and clinging to her body, her long hair plastered to her face. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then the woman raised her hand. Not in warning, but in beckoning. Slowly, she pointed to the woods. Emma shook her head. No, no way. She put the car in reverse and started backing away. But the woman's face changed. Her mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, stretching until it looked like her jaw would snap. A low, guttural scream filled the air, muffled by the car windows but deep enough to rattle Emma's bones. She hit the gas and sped past, heart hammering, refusing to look back. For the next 5 miles, nothing moved except the trees bending in the wind. Then she saw it. A small cabin up ahead, light flickering faintly in the window. Relief washed over her. Maybe someone could help. She pulled in, gravel crunching beneath her tires, and honked once. No response. The cabin looked abandoned, the wood warped and gray. But the front door was ajar, creaking slightly in the breeze. She called out, "Hello!" No answer. The air inside was thick with the smell of mildew and wet earth. Her flashlight beam danced across the walls, lined with photographs. Dozens of them. Each one was of the same stretch of road she'd just driven, taken from different angles at different times of day. In every photo there was a car. A red one. Her car. Her breath caught. What the hell? Then she noticed something else. In the corner of each photo, barely visible, was the same woman she'd seen on the road, sometimes standing, sometimes closer, sometimes almost pressed against the glass of the car window. The floor creaked behind her. Emma spun around, the beam of light trembling in her hand. A faint whisper filled the air, soft at first, then clearer. "Don't stop. Keep driving." The voice came from all around her, echoing off the walls. The light flickered. For a split second, she thought she saw movement, a shadow darting just out of view. She turned for the door, but it was gone. The cabin stretched longer now, deeper, the floorboards groaning under her feet. The photographs shifted on the walls, the images changing. They now showed her inside the cabin, flashlight raised, terror frozen on her face. "No, no, this isn't real." A cold hand touched her shoulder. She screamed and spun around, but there was no one there. The air was icy, her breath visible in the beam of her flashlight. She backed away slowly until she hit something solid. A wall that hadn't been there before. On it, written in dripping black letters, were the words, "Drive or die." The whispering grew louder. She bolted through a doorway that seemed to appear out of nowhere and burst outside. The forest was different now, the trees taller, denser, pressing in close. Her car sat where she'd left it, but something was wrong. The headlights were on, and through the fogged-up windshield, she saw a silhouette sitting in the driver's seat. Emma froze. The shape moved. Slowly, it turned its head toward her, and smiled. It was her. The door creaked open by itself, and her own voice came from inside the car. "Get in." She stumbled back, shaking her head. "No, no, this isn't happening." The other version of her, the thing wearing her face, tilted its head, eyes gleaming white in the darkness. "You don't have a choice." The forest around her began to move. Shapes emerged from the trees, pale, wet figures, dragging their feet, whispering her name. She ran. Branches tore at her clothes, her hair whipping in the wind. Behind her, the whispers became screams. The sound of the river grew louder until it roared like thunder. She stumbled toward it, nearly slipping on the slick mud of the riverbank. The water churned black, reflecting faint light. But from where? She looked up. On the opposite side of the river, dozens of lanterns flickered, lining the shore. And beneath each one hung a figure, suspended, swaying gently. The woman in the gray dress was among them, her hollow eyes fixed on Emma. The others began to move their mouths in unison, though no sound came out, until suddenly, in one voice, they spoke, "Stay on the road." Emma stumbled back toward her car, gasping. When she reached it, the engine was already running. The driver's seat was empty now. The radio crackled softly. "Get back in," her voice whispered through the static. She hesitated, then climbed inside. The moment she closed the door, everything went silent. The road ahead stretched straight into the fog. Her reflection in the mirror smiled faintly, even though she wasn't. Then the headlights flared to life, and the car began moving on its own, tires rolling slowly forward. As the fog swallowed the car, the radio whispered one last time, "No one ever leaves Hollow Creek." By morning, the road was empty again. Only tire tracks remained, leading into the mist, and then stopping abruptly, as if the car had vanished mid-journey. Locals said they sometimes saw headlights flickering deep in the trees on foggy nights, and if you listened closely, you could hear a woman's voice calling softly from the woods, asking for a ride. The highway stretched endlessly through the Nevada desert, cutting through the sand and silence like a scar across the earth. The horizon shimmered under a blood-red dusk, and the only sign of life was a single car, a beat-up black sedan speeding west. Inside were two brothers, Luke and Ryan, both in their late 20s, running from something they didn't talk about. They had been on the road for 16 hours straight. No music, no laughter, just the hum of the tires and the low growl of the engine. The air in the car was thick with exhaustion and unspoken tension. Ryan, the older brother, stared blankly at the road ahead, eyes sunken, jaw tight. Luke leaned against the window, watching the endless desert roll by. "You think we lost them?" he finally asked. Ryan didn't answer. He just gripped the steering wheel tighter. They had taken this trip to forget, to leave behind the wreckage of a life that had gone wrong. A failed business, mounting debt, a tragedy no one spoke of. But lately, it wasn't just guilt chasing them. Something else was out there. It had started 2 nights ago, when they'd taken an old desert road shortcut that wasn't on any map. A storm had rolled in out of nowhere, the radio flickering with static before cutting out completely. Since then, things had felt off. The road seemed to shift under their tires, leading them in circles. The same gas station had appeared twice, even though they hadn't turned around. And at night, Ryan swore he'd seen a figure standing in the rearview mirror. A shadow, barely visible, but always there. As night fell, Luke checked his phone. "No signal again," he muttered. The battery icon flashed red before dying completely. The dashboard clock blinked 12 o'clock, stuck, no matter how many times Ryan tried to reset it. Then they saw it, a glowing sign flickering in the distance. Last stop diner 5 miles ahead. Relief washed over them. Food, coffee, a moment to rest. But as they pulled into the gravel lot, something about the place felt wrong. The neon sign buzzed weakly, half the letters dead. The parking lot was empty except for a rusted truck that looked like it hadn't moved in decades. The air was unnaturally still, no wind, no sound. Inside, the diner looked frozen in time. Chrome counters, red leather booths, a jukebox in the corner that softly played a song from the 1950s. The smell of coffee lingered faintly, but the pot on the counter was cold. "Hello," Ryan called. No answer. Then, from the back, a door creaked open. An old woman appeared, wearing a pale blue uniform. Her hair was perfectly pinned, her lipstick fresh, as if she had been expecting them. "You boys look tired," she said in a gentle voice. "Long way from home, aren't you?" Luke forced a smile. "Yeah, just passing through." She nodded slowly, eyes lingering on them a second too long. "There's pie and coffee. Sit anywhere you like." They slid into a booth near the window. Ryan stared out at the desert. Endless blackness now, with no sign of their car's headlights reflecting off anything. It felt like the whole world beyond that diner had disappeared. The woman brought their plates. The coffee was steaming. The pie looked freshly baked. Luke dug in hungrily, but Ryan hesitated. "When did you last see anyone else come through here?" he asked. The woman's smile faltered. "You're the first tonight." "Tonight?" Luke asked between bites. She looked at him blankly. "Yes, it's always tonight." Before either could respond, the jukebox changed tracks on its own. A soft crackle, then an old radio broadcast began to play. A man's voice, distorted and echoing. "Breaking news. 2 brothers last seen heading west on Route 6. If you see them, do not approach. Authorities report." The rest dissolved into static. Luke froze, fork halfway to his mouth. "What the hell?" The lights flickered. The old woman turned to the jukebox, frowning. "Always does that," she murmured. "Ever since the accident." "What accident?" Ryan asked. She didn't answer. She just looked at them again, her expression unreadable now. "You should finish your meal before it gets cold." Ryan pushed his plate away. "We should go." Luke looked confused. "Go where?" "We're in the middle of nowhere." But Ryan was already standing, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. He walked toward the door, only to find that the glass reflected not the diner behind him, but a black void. His own reflection blinked back at him, a second too late. Luke stood too suddenly pale. "Ryan, look at this." The pie on his plate was moving, writhing. He pushed it aside and gasped. Beneath it, the plate was covered in black symbols, written in something that looked like ash. The lights went out completely. The jukebox fell silent. For a few moments, there was only the sound of their breathing. Then the old woman's voice came from the dark. But it was deeper now, layered, like several people speaking at once. "You boys should have stayed off this road." A cold hand brushed Luke's arm. He yelped, backing away, but when the lights flickered back on, the diner was full. Every booth was occupied by figures frozen in place. Some were half decomposed. Some were nothing but shadows wearing clothes. All of them turned their heads in unison toward the brothers. Ryan grabbed Luke's wrist. "Run!" They burst through the door and stumbled into the desert night. But the diner was gone. Behind them, there was only empty sand and the sound of distant humming. Ahead, the car sat idling, headlights on. Ryan jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the door. The radio blared to life instantly, a frantic emergency broadcast. "If you are hearing this, turn back. Route 6 is closed due to multiple fatalities. Repeat, do not drive past mile marker 113. Luke glanced out the window. The nearest marker they'd passed, 112. Ryan floored the accelerator. The car tore down the empty road, the darkness closing in around them. The temperature dropped, frost crawling up the inside of the windshield. The radio sputtered again, now playing the same 1950s song from the diner. "Ryan," Luke whispered. "We're not moving." Ryan blinked. The speedometer read 70, but outside the world wasn't changing. The same cracked stretch of asphalt, the same coyote skeleton on the shoulder, the same billboard they'd passed 15 minutes ago. He hit the brakes. The car didn't slow down. The headlights flickered, revealing shapes on the side of the road. The same diner patrons standing motionless, watching. The old woman among them smiling faintly. Then came the whisper. Faint at first, then deafening. "You never left." Luke screamed as the windshield cracked, a dark hand pressing from the outside. The glass shattered, and cold air poured in. Ryan swerved wildly, the car spinning, flipping once, twice, before coming to rest upside down in the sand. Everything went silent. When Luke came to, he was hanging from his seatbelt, bleeding and disoriented. Ryan was gone. The desert was quiet again. Smoke rose from the hood, curling into the night. He crawled out, calling his brother's name. Nothing, just wind. Then, in the distance, a light appeared. A single diner sign glowing softly through the haze. "Last Stop Diner." He stumbled toward it, dazed, heart pounding. The door creaked open before he touched it. Inside, everything was exactly as before, the booths, the jukebox, the pie on the counter. And sitting in the far booth, sipping coffee, was Ryan. Luke froze. Ryan! His brother looked up and smiled. Took you long enough. Luke stepped closer. You're okay? Ryan nodded. Yeah. Sit down, man. You look awful. Something about his tone was off. Too calm. Too rehearsed. Luke hesitated, but exhaustion won. He slid into the booth. The coffee was hot. The jukebox began to play that same song again. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Then Luke noticed the reflection in the window. His brother wasn't moving his lips, but his reflection was grinning, wide and unnatural. The reflection turned to look at him directly. Welcome home, it said. The room began to distort. The walls pulsed like veins, the lights dimming until only the neon sign outside remained. Luke tried to stand, but his body felt heavy, as though gravity had shifted. Across from him, Ryan's skin began to crack, flakes of dust falling onto the table. His eyes turned black, his mouth stretching into that same impossible smile. Luke screamed and bolted for the door, but when he stepped outside, there was no desert, only darkness stretching forever. The diner behind him dissolved into mist. The road lay ahead, endless, glowing faintly under an unseen moon. A car waited there, the same black sedan, perfectly intact. Its headlights flicked twice, as if beckoning him. The radio inside crackled. Keep driving. He turned back, but the diner was gone. The only thing left was a flickering sign half buried in sand that read, "Now hiring." Luke climbed into the car, trembling. The engine roared to life, though his hands never touched the key. As he pulled onto the road, he realized something horrifying. There was no horizon anymore. The world was looping, folding in on itself. Every few miles, he passed a familiar landmark. The same coyote skeleton, the same cracked billboard, the same diner glowing faintly in the distance. And every time, he heard Ryan's voice whisper from the passenger seat, "Almost there." By morning, travelers on Route 6 would report seeing a lone black sedan parked on the shoulder, engine still running, headlights on, no one inside. Locals say if you drive that stretch at night, you might hear a faint radio playing old songs, and sometimes, if you look in your rearview mirror, you'll see two brothers sitting quietly in the back seat, smiling at you. And if you do, don't stop, because on Route 6, the road doesn't end, it just waits for you to join it.